We just wait for quarter past before we start, because I know some people might be behind the cars. Yes. Well, welcome everyone this morning. It's lovely to have some sunshine and no rain, so I hope you all survived the weather very well. I just found my scarfing overflowed because I put the scarfing clean in for this Monday, so I sort of missed that by a little bit. But never mind. I'm Moira Stiles and I'm the President of the Settlers Association, and welcome you all here today. If any of you aren't members and you want to join, you can join at the front desk, so we'd love to welcome you. Now, today's speaker is Stephen Standrift, and he is involved in the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters. But on the slide it says he's also in the New Zealand Radio Amateur Station Z14B. Yeah. And we're going to hear today about the radio transmitters and how there was the first round the world radio contact 100 years ago, and it was from Dunedin to England. So I welcome Stephen.
Thank you very much, Moira, for that introduction. My call sign, which is an amateur station, ZL4BN, and we're not really known by name initially when we're talking to people around the world. It's by number, because ZL says that I'm from New Zealand, 4 says I'm from the deep south, and BN says I'm old. So today I'm going to be talking about custodians in general terms and a couple of other things. So I'm the 3rd custodian of that call sign. And I guess with respect to radio call signs, you people will be very au fait with ZL4YA and 4ZB and various other stations around New Zealand which are broadcast stations. So they too have a station licence, just the same as amateurs. So thank you, Moira, again, and also thanks to Chris and Peter from Toitū who've organised me. And it's a privilege to be here and to talk to you guys and to further the cause of radio, but also to further the cause of custodianship, which you all take a part of, and which we as radio amateurs take a part of, and which the Bell family, where our hero is born from or comes from, they're also custodians. So there is a ribbon that ties us all together. So that's pretty much the introduction, and excuse me for being a bit jittery with the notes. I apologise to half of you because only half of you are wearing glasses, so I'm half blind. The rest of you will just have to understand. That worked. So 100 years ago on the 18th of October, which is next week, I think, yes, Friday, Saturday, an event happened that made the world much smaller. But first, let me talk about a couple of things. My talk title is about custodians, And I'm including all you lot in that group as well because you're custodians of the social history of Otago Southland. And I'm a radio custodian and the bells are custodians of the land. So on it goes. The other word I want to talk about was station. And we are all running different stations. So what is a station? I'll just run through a few things. Excuse me leaping up and down because I just can't quite see everything. 1860, and that's going back, I think, before Toitū started. It was 1878, I think, was it? Toitū began. So in 1860, Johnny Jones owned Shag Valley Station, which wasn't called that in those days. And you all probably well know Johnny Jones. And when I was at school, back 65 years ago, we were told that Johnny Jones was a whaler from Wakawaiti. Now, he was much more than that. He was a magnate, and one of his aims was to take over the ownership of the South Island of New Zealand, and it was his stated aim, and he was well on the way of doing that, but the government clipped his wings, basically. Anyway, he ended up selling the station as it was to the Bell family. So that was 1860, and that was Shag Valley Station. My second station I want to talk about is Dunedin Railway Station. In 1872, it became the home for Josephine, who is the hallmark of this organisation, I guess, or one of them anyway. It's something I always looked at when I was a kid when I came here, back so many years ago. So in 1924, Zulu Lima, or Zulu 4 Alpha Alpha, was the station address of Frank Bell, who was one of the generation of Bells, and I'll cover that a little bit later. He licensed a radio station at Shag Valley, at Palmerston. So 1960, Josephine current station was created here at the front by the custodians of Otago social history, which includes you guys, and her early memories were preserved by Toitū. 1988, the Otago branch of New Zealand Radio Transmitters became the licence holder of Frank Bell's original station licence, except it was at that stage when we got that licence, you had to include ZL instead of Z, and it was ZL4AA, and it will remain so forever because we fiercely protect that station licence, both from the respect of Frank, who did a pretty big thing, which is not quite recognised enough around the world. I'll deal with that a bit later too. So in 2024, all the station custodians are celebrating the 100-year anniversary of what Frank did in 1924. He didn't do it on his own, and I'll come to that in a second. He got some help from a young schoolboy who wasn't quite so young. He was just set to go to university, and he was going back because the school had a station. He was operating his radio station from Mill Hill School in London. So I'll cover that soon. So the topics for today is war custodians, which I want to cover off, the custodianship of the Bell Farm. Wireless custodians is how Frank's licence travelled through time. Radio 100 years back, so what it was like and what Frank had to deal with. And radio in 2024, so where we've come since 100 years back thanks in part to Frank Bell and Cecil Goyder, who was the Englishman. And the last one is the reenactment, is what we're doing to celebrate the 100 years anniversary of the event. And this lecture is part of that reenactment, of course. Okay, so the Wall Custodians. 1860, Sir Francis Dillon Bell purchased and formed Shag Valley Station from Johnny Jones. I think before that it was a bit of a station, but it was sort of a lot undeveloped, I guess. Francis Dillon Bell, which is also the owner of the name of Frank Bell, which we're our hero in this exhibit, he developed the station, the building, the required structure to house workers and equipment. Structures existing at that time were altered and added to, and as required. In its heyday of wool, the shearing shed was 10 stands. Now, I'm not sure whether you understand what a stand is, but that is the place that the shearer works, and in those days it would have been clippers, and then later on they had a belt drive system, and now it's all electric. And not all the stands are used. I think there's 6 in operation at the moment. So the family at that stage, our hero's father is Alf. They were interested in science as well as farming. And Alfred was a fellow of 2 Royal Societies, Astronomical Society and Microscopical Society. The farm saw arguably the first telephone line in New Zealand to a neighbouring farm. It had a telescope, an observatory. It had a science lab and a laboratory where experimentation was conducted, not just radio, but also biological and chemistry. So they were scientists and leading lights in New Zealand at that stage. So Frank, which was the son of Alfred, became an amateur radio pioneer, as did his sister, and her name's Brenda, and that's another complete topic for discussion later on. Together they were the first licensed radio amateurs in New Zealand, man and woman. So Frank was the first man, Brenda was the first woman, obviously. So today, the 5th generation of Bells is led by Johnny and Tanya, and they continue the family tradition of sheep and beef farming. That is currently over 164 years. So that's a bit older than most of us put together. So turning now to wireless. Good. Frank, when he first got licensed, there weren't many amateurs in New Zealand, and sometimes he used the call sign Bell, B-E-L-L. That was very early days, and of course soon that gave way to Z, which was the country code, because communications was starting to happen between countries. So he cornered the call sign of Z4AA, which later changed to ZL4AA. And as I said before, in June 1988, the Otago Branch Association inherited the call sign in late 1988. So, and as I mentioned, today the station is fiercely protected by Otago radio amateurs and used weekly and also on formal occasions such as this. So I'm representing ZL4AA today. Basically, the whole ethos is that when you inherit a licence such as that, you have to pay respect to the previous custodians, and that's what we're doing. Frank is remembered pretty much weekly whenever we go on our weekly schedule, which is Sunday evenings. So that respect is demanded because what he did. So here we have a picture of Frank on the right in his army uniform, Brenda in her quasi-army uniform because she was involved in non-military aspects. She was a volunteer, and that's Frank's radio station. But just let me talk about these two guys. When war broke out, they just volunteered and off they went, both of them. So that must have been a bit of a loss to the farm, but it's evident of what the Bell family were like. They saw it was a duty and off they went. So I dug out Frank's war records just to try and get an idea, because we don't focus that much on what happened to him before the war. So it was one of the reasons he sort of got into radio. So he was a gunner, which he was part of the team of guys that operated to an artillery piece in the First World War. So that's firing shells across the trenches. And they were a part of a team of New Zealand gunners, so there was more than one gun. There was a number, and I'm not sure how many there were. So what happened was a shell came over and exploded the gun that Frank was working on, or they were using dud ammunition and the gun just blew up. But they all got killed apart from Frank, and he was lying in this big hole. And his leg badly broken, and he was bleeding from his carotid artery, which is not a good sign for life. So a young bloke from the next gun jumped over into the hole and stopped the flow of blood on Frank's neck until help arrived. And eventually it did, and that guy, young bloke, rescued Frank, saved his life, obviously. So he was from Timaru. And 2 weeks later, he was killed in the same manner by German bullets, of course. So Frank ended up being invalided back to England. He spent quite a long time convalescing in England. And back in those days, I guess, there was much higher limitation on what they could do to fix people's legs. So Frank come back from England on a boat, obviously, and that was sort of convalescing on the way home. And then he spent quite a bit of time convalescing. He was in Dunedin Hospital some period of time, and at home where he wasn't so active around the farm. So when he got back, he was at a bit of a loose end, and he took up radio, which was a hobby that had been introduced to him by his father and also by his science teachers at Waitaki Boys, where he attended before he went overseas. So just a little bit about Brenda. She was a volunteer, and she worked at New Zealand House, and she also worked as a cook, and later on she worked at a number of things and became very interested in broadcast radio and was part of broadcast radio as well, but I won't go into that too far. It's another story. Going back at that time, when around 1924, radio was in its infancy, or transmitting was, and all the commercial people decided that HF radio was no good at all, so they gave it to the amateurs. So you've got in radio low frequency, medium frequency, high frequency, and of course you'll know that low frequency, medium frequency is your broadcast stations and things like that. And you also probably know and remember back in the day, high frequency was the playground for all overseas services such as the BBC or Voice of America or those who had a high frequency broadcast, which was broadcast to all Americans around the world and anybody else that wanted to listen. So there was none of that high frequency broadcast service back then in 1924. So we enter another guy from Dunedin because there was a few amateurs around and they were a solid bunch of gentlemen. His name was Ralph Slade, and if you look in the display cabinets down the back here, Toitū, there is quite a bit of information about Ralph. And what happened was he heard England on his radio and he transmitted and couldn't make it. So that's somewhat akin to going to a dance and seeing a person across the room that you'd like to dance with and looking at them and say, oh, she's looking nice, I'd really like to go and have a dance with her. Well, in the same way, there's no contact made unless you go up and ask that person for a dance. It's the same with radio. If you hear somebody, it's not a contact, and if they hear you, it's not a contact. And poor old Ralph, that's what happened to him. He heard England, and he called up Frank and said, Frank, I've heard these people, and that was Cecil. I can't reach them on my antenna. You've got a better antenna, and can you have a go? And then after that, history was made. So Ralph Slade, being the gentleman that he was, which most radio people are, basically gave history away to Frank, and that's the end of the story. So on 18th of October 1924, in the evening, Frank called Cecil Goyder, who's our student, at Mill Hill School, because Mill Hill School had the radio station. The science master there was instrumental in it, and Cecil was mad keen on radio. So the dawn of shortwave radio was made. And previous to that time, all these big companies, Marconi and Motorola and Mallard and all those people, could not make this happen. And it was down to a schoolboy and a farmer. And they proved that this communication was possible. And it was a mammoth effort because Shag Valley Station and London are what is called geographically antipodes, which is not quite right, but it's close enough. So it's the furthest distance you can transmit a signal. Going that way around the world or that way around the world makes no difference. It's around 12,000 miles, so that's as far as you can get. So that record has stood since 1924 because it can't be broken theoretically. There is a point in halfway between London and Spain, out in the middle of the ocean, that could happen, but then it wouldn't be country to country, it would be country to ocean. So that's why the record won't ever be broken. Before that, Frank had held records. He was the first to contact Australia, the first to contact America, first to contact South America, and Brenda was the first person from New Zealand to contact South Africa. So what happened then? I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I'm thinking that Frank's leg got better and better, and then the responsibility of farming took over, and his radio days gave way to farming, and he handed over the station, as it were, to Brenda, who had that interest. So how did they do it? There's a particular way that it was done. So, right, This is a child's drawing of the Earth, except, no, it's not. It's a satellite projection. So if you imagine the Earth being a almost round sphere and coming from Dunedin in a straight line to London, it would be a straight line. So when you unpack the sphere and put it on a flat projection, there's the world, and the straight distance coming from New Zealand, excuse me, I'm a bit wobbly on my feet, there goes up that way and over the top and back down. Now that's a straight line. So we think that's a straight line, but it's not. In the world, that's a straight line. And when you're flying in an aeroplane to Los Angeles or London, you'll notice that they fly in similar fashion. It's called the Great Circle Line. So what else is important here is what's called the grey line terminator. And what that is that this line here, which goes from London to Dunedin or Shag Valley, or the same way, the other way. So it's called long path or short path, but both paths are the same in this instance because it's the antipodes. So Earth is protected by the ionosphere, which stops debris and space junk and all sorts of things falling on it. And it's a many-layered thing. So if you imagine it's like an onion, we are interested radio-wise in 4 layers, which is D, E, and F. And if you peel off the onion skin, you've got 4 layers on top of that. So what happens is when the sun's out, it charges up the D layer, which is D, which is A, B, C, D, so which is miles up in the air, of course. And so when you send a radio signal out, the D layer absorbs it because it's charged up and it attracts the radio signal. So when it's twilight time and the sun goes down, and halfway between that, or in the morning in England, this is 7:20 UTC is 8:20 in the evening Dunedin time. So this is the evening shot. This map is a satellite projection of the propagation. So in the twilight time, the sun goes down and that D layer disappears. So you're left with an E and F layer, which is still there. So our radio signals go up into the E layer and the F layer. So when it hits the E layer, it reflects back down. So it can reflect off the ocean, and you see here there's quite a lot of ocean in that way. So that's the best way that we've got of getting a radio signal to London, because it comes back down and reflects off the ocean. And to get to London from Dunedin or Shag Valley, it's 5 hops. So it goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, bang, and you've got there. So in other words, to get a signal from Shag Valley Station to London, it was a bit of a miracle, because when we put an antenna up, and I'll show you the antenna we're putting up in a few minutes, it's only 5% of that signal heads towards London. The rest of it just goes, the rest of it just goes up into the sky and is lost, absorbed by the D layer. So of course in the daytime we have a point-to-point radio connection, which means we just go directly, but that's limited in the distance we can travel. So we're always looking at this to see whether London is open at any particular time of day. So the other colours, it means other things. It's heat, so I won't go into that at all. Twilight happens. Yep, and this grey line terminator was used by our hero in 1924, except they didn't know what it was particularly. So I think we're moving on. No, not quite moving on yet. I've got a really boring part of the presentation, which I'll just go through at the moment, because it's a chronological explanation of what happened with radio between 1839, I've got in 1932. Frank and Cecil sit right in the middle of this. And they proved that this worked, but they didn't quite know how. But it only happened once a day. So the very next night, it happened again, and they talked again. The night after, Frank Slade made his appearance and talked to England. So in 1839, Gauss first speculated, hey, there could be an ionised layer of gases above the Earth. So then in 1878, a man called Stewart said there was a conductive layer, which means it's electrically conductive. And then in 1901, Marconi succeeded in crossing the Atlantic with a radio transmission, except he probably didn't. Marconi was perhaps a little bit of an entrepreneur, and he used 17 of Tesla, and you will be familiar with Tesla now as another famous guy that's a bit of an unsung hero. But the car that Elon Musk is producing is named after him. He used 17 of Tesla's patents to create wireless, and the credit for inventing wireless was taken off Marconi, but around the world people still saying it was Marconi. 1902, a couple of guys suggested Marconi's signal was propagated by reflecting of the waves, which is true, but it's arguably that it didn't happen because it was at a low frequency which doesn't bounce very well, so it's another thing. 1910, 1912, 1919, after the war, was a good time for radio because there was a pressure on for making radio, and it got better and better very quickly, as things do in the war, weapons and radio and stuff like that. 1924, the phenomenon of long-distance shortwave radio was discovered by Goyder and Bell, or Bell and Goyder, whichever you want to look at it. If you're English, it's Goyder and Bell, and if you're a Kiwi, it's Bell and Goyder. However, what actually did happen is that Frank Bell put out a call for about 5 minutes, and Mr. Goyder was sitting there with his headphones on saying, this is a hoax. That signal was so strong, it must be somebody that's local. So we didn't answer it. So after 5 minutes, he said, I've got to get rid of these guys, and answered it. And there was an interaction between the two of them. And still Mr. Goyder didn't quite believe it, and demanded that Frank Bell sent telegrams, cablegrams, which he did. So then it happened. So from 1924 to 1932, I won't bore you, but the ionosphere got discovered by scientists after our man and Mr. Goyder had actually discovered it. So, right. Okay, so here we are. Okay, so this is what's happening at Shag Valley. Yep. To celebrate Frank Bell's stunning effort in pioneering radio, it's a matter that's really dear to our hearts in the amateur fraternity, and I'm really happy to be able to speak here today because he's a bit of an unsung hero in a lot of ways. And the more people that know about it, the better. But what we're doing up there is we're erecting, or we have erected actually, 7 antenna. There's a couple of them. That one there is directional. So when the guys get down, so this was just put up on Sunday. This one here is omnidirectional, and as I said, only 5% of that signal gets to head to London. So when you transmit on that, it's like a circle and it goes everywhere. And then between the angles of 5 degrees and 15 degrees, it's a takeoff angle to head to the ionosphere, and it heads to London along that terminator. So what we're doing is in 1964, and this is a really good photo because it makes me look slim, so I've stretched it. This is a historic cairn that we put in 1964. So we're redeveloping that to some extent, and this is my team that were involved in that. Lindsay, the guy in the middle, has organised the monumental masons to reconfigure all this. So we're having an unveiling ceremony at the farm on the Saturday after we try and reenact the radio call, which we will be doing at that grey line time, which will be 7:30 in the evening on the 18th. And on the next day we're having what we're calling as a family day. We're rededicating the cairn. We're having a bit of an ease up, and then we're having a Zoom meeting around the world. And I think there's probably going to be about 75 people on that. We're going to end up with a cast of about 50 up at Shag Valley Station. So these antennas, but 2, we're putting up 7. In fact, they're up. We're contacting amateurs around the world, and that is already started. So we've had that running for a few days. Already, the team doing that have contacted 60 countries around the world. So this isn't just a bunch of 200 people, it's thousands that are involved in this around the world. We're putting a radio comms vehicle up there as well. We're going to be contacting the International Space Station, which sounds fancy, but it's not. It's only 250 miles, so if it comes overhead, it's not like 12,000 miles to London, it's 250 miles. So we're running several workshops and training sessions, and we're running 6 radio sets and a couple of Starlinks as well. So how are we going for time? Are we doing all right? So here, this is getting a little bit towards the end, and I just want to go back up the truck. Okay, I want to back up the truck and talk about the bells. That's Tanya and Johnny, and that's a photo taken in April. And in April, we were sitting there, and I got a call on my portable radio, which is a Samsung that's on steroids. And I'll just explain that. Up here is a picture which you probably can't see, but my Samsung telephone, using data, loads this, which is a ham radio. And you'll see in there, I think it says Los Angeles in there. You can see that? Great. So I can call people in Los Angeles over my phone with this ham radio. And there's 35,000 stations around the world that I can call up using my phone. We've got 3 or 4 in Dunedin. So anywhere I go with my phone, if I've got data on it, I can use that as a ham radio, basically. And on top of that, I can use my phone for all sorts of other things. As we were sitting there, I got a call from my friend him and his wife, semi-retired, and they do a lot of cruising. And they don't want to hand their money over to their kids, so they're always off cruising on the Princess Line mainly. So I got a call from Ian, and said, there's been an accident on the boat. What's going on? So here's me in Dunedin, he's in Hawaii, or off the coast of Hawaii, asking me what's going on. So, because he knew that I was a radio guy. So the first thing I looked up, and this is photos which is not what happened to Ian, but it happened last night when I dragged these off. So the first thing I did was to look up the boat, and here is a picture radar of where the boat is, and this is a boat which is travelling from Sydney to Auckland. So, and it's the Diamond Princess. So it's halfway basically to Auckland. So I could see that on my phone. Then I looked up what was going on the boat, and this is a camera of what the captain of the boat sees when he's looking out in the ocean. So Auckland must be off in the distance here, you can't quite see. So immediately I can tell where the boat is, what it's doing, how fast it's going, when it's going to dock. All those things are available to me by a bit of skullduggery and a bit of looking at shipping radar. So same thing applies to airplanes, because Ian's always flying backwards and forwards to get to these boats. So here's a couple of things. Last night, it's around that time, what does that say, 6:40? Okay, so that's 7:40 last night when I was doing this last slide. This is a picture of all the aeroplanes that are flying in Australia at 7:40 p.m. last night. Every one of them. So you don't want to look at America, you'll go cross-eyed. So then I thought something a bit more simple. So I looked at a map in New Zealand, and here's a private jet flying from Queenstown to Sydney. So that's a small jet which I can follow. So Elon Musk, I can follow his aeroplane around on my phone and see where he is and what he's doing. And anybody else that's registered, because all airplanes have got to be registered, and they're all on this thing called flight radar. So on top of that, Ian had told me that everybody had to go to their cabins, which is fine. He wanted, well, what's going on? So I found out because I was monitoring the Coast Guard radio as well. And the ship diverted a little bit, and as soon as they got into distance, they sent out a helicopter. Now, as it happened, so that's why everybody got sent into their cabin, so nobody ran under the helicopter's blades, and one of the crewmen had fallen over and broken his leg as it happened. So luckily for me, but not for these two people, this I uplifted from the Coast Guard helicopter last night at that same time, and here you'll see, I think there's a guy's hand there. He's the helicopter operator, and they're winching two people off a boat in the same manner, off this Diamond, no, not the Diamond Princess, it's another boat off Honolulu. And this is, as I said, I've lifted that off the Coast Guard system, and there's these two guys, one 70 and the other 78, being airlifted because they had a medical emergency. And that was yesterday. It just happened that it was good for me because I could get the graphic for you guys. So all in all, with the power of my telephone, using radio to get to a base station, I can do a huge number of things. And I didn't know how I could explain that to the Bells, because we were sitting around the kitchen table talking about 1924 and they're au fait with what's going on communications-wise around the world, but they probably didn't quite realise the extent of what I had in my pocket. So, and that all happened within the space of 10 minutes after we had that meeting. So what else do we do, radio guys? It's not just that. I'll just see if I've got another slide. No, I don't think so. Just let me. No, not quite there yet. So we what has happened with radio is that there's been a change in focus. In Frank's day, it was to get from one point to another. Now to get there, and I think the slide that we had way back was the fact that you had to build your own equipment. You didn't build the valves, but you could buy a valve, but you made everything else. And it was all construction. You could see that photo that had Frank and Brenda together sitting with that huge radio station. Well, that's much more condensed these days. But there is another side construction in radio that wasn't available then because of the growth in HF radio, because of Frank making that discovery of how the ionosphere worked. So we have 7 or more than that streams of radio within our club or association, and that's the same worldwide. So in New Zealand we have an amateur radio emergency communications, which is partly SAR. We work in with the Coast Guard and police, and every week we have a AREC report on our. We have a meeting every Sunday by radio. There's hardly a week goes by where there hasn't been an emergency call out for our search and rescue radio people. They're always training, and it's a hobby to some people, but they're doing a public service as well. In addition to that, we provide radio communications for the Otago car rally and things like that. There's a big emphasis on construction of bits and bobs and boxes and how to improve radios and how to build tiny miniaturised things. There's a very large focus on antenna design, and there are thousands of people experimenting with building their own antenna because these days it's probably in the big sets that Frank used, people buy something that's made by the manufacturer because it's too complex, but they focus on building their antenna and things like that. We've got guys who are bouncing their signals off the moon to talk to people. We've got guys that are working for NASA, analysing signals bouncing off Jupiter. So when you consider that NASA's not always, in America's not always pointing at Jupiter, but at certain times of the day, New Zealand is pointing at Jupiter. So amateur radio people around the world, going around the world, are furiously listening for Jupiter. So we've got a lot of blended communications, which is what I've demonstrated that I've got on my cell phone, which most people just wouldn't realise is available. And then we've got a major non-internet radio system, and that we've got another focus group on. They provide email services that are not over the internet. So in a super emergency, the first thing that goes, as it did in Christchurch with the earthquakes, the internet disappears. And then the cell phones disappear. So in those circumstances, we can provide email services over our radios, and that can go to any country in the world, obviously. So the last thing I just wanted to round up with, I mentioned before about the Bell family, because through their grace that we're able to set up this whole shebang at Shag Valley Station. And I think that now they're realising how we are custodians of radio and they're custodians of the farm, and how it's interwoven. And as I pointed out, you guys are also custodians of the social history of Otago, and that's how we're also interwoven with you guys. But the Bell family are really are a great illustration of what it is to be New Zealand people. And currently they've also, they've got an interest in football within the family. And the two sons of the family who were young lads back when we last did this thing, which was 10 years ago, they were about this high. Now one of them, plays for Otago in the football team, and the other one is in the All Black squad, and he played in America recently for the All Blacks. So that's probably another illustration of where we're going, and I hope that's given you a bit of an idea of what happened back in 1924 and how important it was, and how we're continuing on with that by telling as many people, such as you good folks, what happened. We have two station call signs for this project we're doing. We're using our call sign ZL4AA, which is Frank's old call sign, but we've also got a special call sign which is ZM100DX, and that station already has it's been operating for 2 days. I think they've contacted 800 or 600 people, I'm not sure which it is, and 60 countries around the world already. The last part of what I want to say is that on Sunday the 20th, we're having a coincidence with JOTA, which is Jamboree on the Air, the Scouting Association, worldwide scouting, 2 million members. And we are providing a connection for scouting to New Zealand. Scouting and radio in New Zealand is not super strong, but in Europe, England, Ireland, America, it's hugely strong. As an example, I just had an email last night from a guy in Eindhoven in Holland, and he sent me a map of a 40-mile radius of his house and said these are the ham radio operators of the Boy Scouts, and there were 33 of them in this. So as far as New Zealand goes, we're lucky to raise a dozen. So that's another thing that we've perhaps got to work on in the future. So finally, I just thank you, Maura and Chris and Peter and Toitū team for making all this possible, and for helping us further the cause of amateur radio and bringing bells out into the spotlight again after 100 years. Thank you.
How many members do you have, and are you getting different age groups so there'll be a continuum?
Yes. Okay. Sad question. There's 5,000 radio amateurs in New Zealand, and we have a group, varying size, in Dunedin. Generally, we get about 40 along every Sunday to our radio schedule we have, which is a news roundup. And the population of radio is ageing, and it's a sad thing, but there is a huge amount of scope, and that's something that we're trying to think about at the moment to attract people. And of course, it's all fashionable. I remember when I was younger, when digital watches come out, you don't see anybody wearing a digital watch these days. The fashion has swung back the other way. So, but good question, Maura. Thank you. Yes.
I actually worked on VLU2, Radio Christmas Island.
Oh, really?
In the 60s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we were volunteers.
Right, so that was a broadcast station?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful.
VLU2.
VLU2. Well, that would be a sought after connection. It's
That was the year the man landed on the moon.
yeah. One of our sections of the 10 sections of what radio is doing is we have people that are hunting all over the world to build up every country, and that would be a sought after case. So our call sign ZM100DX, which is a special call sign, people around the world are just clamouring to get a contact with it. So when we have a contact, we send out what is known as a QSL card, which is like a postcard with the details of our station and things which are on it and the contact. So a lot of people have got their walls plastered with those. Anybody else? Yeah.
I must say I was impressed with the ethos of the radio people. Yes, you all sound like good people fostering international relations, and that altruistic thing, like the woman in Bluff who runs that maritime radio station. But it must also be a force for evil, like the Israeli thing where the pages and the cell phones were all designed to blow up at the same time. Was that radio instigated, or how might that have happened?
Well, I don't think that was radio instigated. By and large, people in radio are out in the open. So when you're talking to somebody, there's not a lot of secrecy going on there. So what happened with those pages and things, which is it's a commercial branch of radio, not an amateur branch. So that could never really be organised by amateurs to do something like that. It would have to be organised as a commercial group. I mean, they sold thousands of those pages to the Palestinian people, or Hamas, is it? Yeah. Oh, Hezbollah, wasn't it? I think they sold them to. So that would have been a governmental objective, I expect. Anyone else? Great.
Thank you so much for your fascinating talk, Stephen. I'm sure everyone else appreciated the amount of research you put into it. It was just so informative. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Another question. I know I was at Ulverston, and I know that Dorothy Thierman from Ulverston had a very close friendship with Brenda Bell.
Oh, with Brenda, yes. Yes.
But I don't see any real evidence of lots of radios at Ulverston.
Sorry, you don't see
Much evidence of radios at Ulverston.
Oh, at Ulverston. Well, I think one might say that Brenda was a very social person and outgoing and friendly, and she was in sort of hospitality and commercial radio, whereas Frank was a shy man, and he wasn't to the fore all the time, but Brenda was. So yes, I could quite imagine that she would be friends of the Thiermans.
But the two of them would be the same social class of single women.
Right, yeah.
Thank you.